Welcome to the Author Blurb podcast. Here, we're here to connect readers and authors so that the readers, you, can find that book or that author you're going to love. So I appreciate you being here. Get ready, enjoy the show, enjoy knowing the authors, and remember, subscribe, tell people about the show, and go buy the author's books, because if you like listening to them and you think they're interesting, they're going to love hearing from you. So here on Author Blurb, I'm talking with William R. Douglas today about his book, The Death and Resurrection of Baseball. And William, you have a lot of interesting reviews on your book. The story itself sounds quite interesting. I'll be honest with you, I've never been much of a baseball person, but the concept of your book could be looked at in many different ways, from baseball being metaphor or whatever for different areas. I'm interested in hearing more about it. Could you tell me and everyone else a bit more about yourself, about your books, and then we can learn more what's going on?
Sure. Well, thanks for first, Eric, for having me on your show, The Author Blurb. It's an honor to be on here and come and talk about the book and have hopefully a lively interchange here. But yeah, it's my debut novel, The Death and Resurrection of Baseball, Echoes from a Distant Past is the subtitle. But yeah, it is a unique storyline. It takes place 140 years in the future. What has happened is that there's been a second American Civil War in the year 2061. And it is the proverbial nail in the coffin, and the sport of baseball then dies as a result of the war. It's between now and 2061, 40 years from now, baseball is on a long-term steady decline in popularity. It becomes overcome by soccer and lacrosse and video games and other sports, and because of the shrinking numbers of little leagues in various towns across America, the kids there's less and less kids playing baseball, which I think in the long term does not bode well for the future of the sport. But anyway, in the story, 140 years from now, a 12-year-old boy finds a relic from the past that has a tie into baseball, but he doesn't know it because in his time, 140 years from now, there's no person that has any memory of the sport of baseball. So he becomes the conduit to rediscovering the sport and also bringing it back to American culture. And as your listeners know, obviously baseball can always be used somewhat metaphorically for America itself. So it's a very, very unique storyline. It's getting good reviews and really making the readers think after they've completed the read.
All right, so let me ask this then. So, like I said, baseball, I'm not a huge fan. I know it's still a popular sport, and I believe, like you said, the there is a decrease in little leagues and things like that across the country. What made you decide to choose baseball as your sport to use in your book, and what actually stemmed the book to come to fruition, or what got you to decide to even write it?
Yeah, so there were several inputs that all went into the formulation of the story. The first input was an article I read several years ago about games that kids used to play before the first American Civil War and how those games went extinct. Nobody knows their names. They don't play them anymore. They're just lost to history. And of course, the first Civil War is now 150 years in our past. So
Right.
they're gone. And then a couple of books I read that were very influential as well. David Aikman's novel from the early 90s called When the Almond Tree Blossoms. David Aikman was a senior foreign correspondent for Time magazine, and in his book It was about a fictional Second American Civil War that's fought along cultural lines of liberal versus conservative ideologies. Another book I read more recently, William Fortune's novel 1 Second After, which is about an EMP attack against the United States. So I just had this thought one day, I've been very active in coaching baseball and softball throughout my life. And I'm very much aware of the declining popularity of baseball, particularly with the youth. And I just had this thought, like, well, gosh, what would happen if baseball were to actually die as a sport? I mean, I don't want to fool your readers or try to pull it over their eyes. There's no danger of baseball collapsing right now. But
No.
look, when you look at long-term trends, you do see this steady decline in the participation numbers of youth, and especially in Little League. I know in my own town here in McHenry, there used to be like, I don't know, 4 different Little Leagues around the area, and now we're down to 1. So that's concerning. But yeah, so the storyline, was the root of it was, what if baseball were to collapse and just go away as a sport? And then the question is, well, how could that happen? And so the how could that happen, as I just touched upon, is a declining popularity, especially youth, and you project it 40 years in the future. And then there's this civil strife that erupts that consumes the country, and the sport that just vanishes. So that's the nexus of that went into the framework of the story.
All right. Now, so I guess one thing that I'm looking at with your book is with it being stemmed from a civil war, because obviously America's still standing, still running. Things have changed if a civil war occurred. Does your book discuss the civil war that occurred, the second civil war, or is it kind of everything's focused on bringing back the bringing back baseball, bringing back the culture, things like that?
Yeah, very excellent question. So, um, the Second Civil War is an undercurrent in the story. The book overall is a feel-good story of hope. That's coming out in multiple reviews. You see the word hope that's in the reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And but what has happened is that the Civil War was such a defining moment in the culture, in the book, that it has reshaped the culture and has helped, if I can use the phrase, kind of recenter America and revitalize it. Things are kind of bad right now, and you just kind of wonder where things are headed. But the Civil War comes along, and like I say, helps recenter the country and helps get people back to a point of getting along with one another, even when they disagree, which is sorely lacking right now. We have a country that's very divided.
Mm-hmm.
People don't get along with anyone unless they agree with them, and
Right.
that's a recipe for disaster. So it is an undercurrent in there. The war is talked about a little bit here and there in the book, and that's intentional when I was writing the story, to spark thought in the reader, as well as possibly discussion, with friends or family.
All
And
right.
then there's some dialogue in the story itself where there's some discussions about the war and what it meant and what happened, etc. And how a big thing was in the story is the history of the war is taught to the kids in school, and they want the kids to really learn it and know it and make sure that they don't ever allow it to happen again in the history of the country.
All right. Now, with the sport itself, bringing back that game out of a forgotten past. The main character, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm going off the reviews of this. I believe that it was a kid that discovered it or something that first found it and started bringing back. Like I think you even said at the beginning that a young guy found the artifact.
Correct.
So, is there any indication of? I guess I'm thinking about how you said at the beginning. There's games from the first Civil War that just disappeared, became extinct, and no one really remembers or knows how they were played. How does baseball, is baseball in your book going to be the same baseball we know today, or does it change with the current setting?
Yeah, no. What happens is when the protagonist is a 12-year-old boy by the
Mm-hmm.
name of Scott, and the story starts out in the first chapter. He and a buddy go exploring in the woods on the other side of the river that for forever anyone can remember has been a no man's land because it was the site of a very famous battle in the war, and it wasn't safe to go over there. But it's been cleaned up by the Army Corps, and they decide they're going to go over there and just go exploring in the woods and see what they can find. And so they find this sign that has a tie back to baseball, but they have no understanding of what it is or what the sign means at first. And it sparks a search for the sign's meaning. In the meantime, Joe Scott, the character, and his brother, they take a trip out to Dyersville, Iowa, where their grandfather lives, and they find a second discovery that also holds a key to the past regarding the sport of baseball. They put the two together, and they're able to begin this adventure to try and rediscover the sport and try to learn it and try to bring it back and introduce it to the culture.
All right, now here's something is so they're going through they're finding these clues, finding this information to bring it back to life. What what kind of challenges are they finding? Do they have people that are trying to stop them from doing this? I mean, what's really the conflicts, some of the conflicts they face
Yeah,
that is going to make sure that I don't sit there and say, okay, this is just a couple kids running around the country trying to play
sure,
baseball.
sure. Well, the antagonist in the story is really not a person. It's the war and the remnants of the war and the destruction of knowledge that is a part of the war. Because what happens in the war is that one of the things that happens is that a computer virus is unleashed, and it goes and invades every computer on the planet and erases all data. And so, with the destruction of all the data, obviously comes the destruction of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
the knowledge that we have access to. And increasingly, the knowledge we have access to is online. And so, if you take that 40 years in the future, and then all of a sudden that's all gone, then you've got a real problem because then you got to try and rediscover that knowledge in old books and magazines, et cetera, et cetera. And where are all those at? I mean, that's
Well,
a challenge in itself, right?
yeah, I mean, it's
Uh,
getting harder and harder to find old books. And I mean, personally, I think I inherited my grandparents' books. And some of those you just kind of look at and go, wow, those were from the 30s and 40s and what so have you. So,
sure, sure,
so
sure.
some of the older books, I can see how that would be a challenge just to find some of these older
Right.
books.
And then the other part of it is that uh, and I talk about the remnant of the war or the lingering after effects of the war, where in this case, there's no one alive that the kids can go talk to about baseball. No one has any memory of it
Right.
because at war's end, the country is in such a bad state that the primary focus is survival, not playing games. And
Right.
so that's another thing, is they have to try and figure this out. They get some help, they find some help, but still there's that lack of interchange between someone who knows the knowledge in their head and someone who doesn't, and that interchange you have when you have that question and answer back and forth. So they don't have that aspect is missing.
All
Like
right.
no one has any memory of the game.
All right. Now, here's one thing that is kind of rattling in my head about it is, do you discuss the shift in culture and things like that, or that might occur, the difference of culture in 150 or 140 years in the future versus what we're dealing with now? Because there was a huge difference in culture from the first Civil War to now, and even after the Civil War, for years and years, the culture was so impacted by that war.
Sure. Yeah. So what winds up happening, and this comes out when your readers will read the story, is that um, the culture has like I say, kind of re-centered itself. When you look at the biggest issue, I think, in our country today is that the family structure is broke. It has
Mm-hmm.
broken down on so many levels. And in the story, the family structure has been restored. And, mom and dad are in the home. There's discipline. There's respect for their elders. And kind of one of the things I put in there, it's at first it seems kind of silly, but when you talk about it, it makes sense. And that is that the family dinner time is restored. Now think about it now. Family dinners are they're rare. I mean, most
Mm-hmm.
families are involved in playing taxi driver, getting their kids to and from all the different activities their kids are involved, and so they're eating dinner in the vehicle or in the bleachers or wherever.
Right.
Right, and so there's all this coming and going, and no one's home at the same time, and everybody's schedules are so packed in the evening. And so, in the book, it's important that the family comes together. They take that time out to break bread and fellowship together, and to talk and share with one another each stories about each person's successes and failures of that day. And it's that interaction at the dinner table, which was very common when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. But
Mm-hmm.
that interaction, I think, is very therapeutic, and also I think helps keep that family cohesion when you can sit around and take that time and share one another's successes and triumphs and tragedies, and encourage one another, applaud one another, whatever the case may be. And so that comes out in the story too, that family dynamic has been restored.
All right. Now, with that, families sounds like it's a big portion of it. What is the actual, I guess, conflict or issues that these boys are facing, other than, well, I'm trying to think of how to actually ask my question, because I know you discussed the conflicts between there, but are there actual people in the story that's making it harder on them, or is it just the separation of knowledge and being able to implement that lost knowledge?
Correct. It's like I say, the antagonist is not a person or a group. It's that destruction of knowledge and the attempt to recover that knowledge. And that's touched upon too, as far as um, there's a portion of the book where it talks about a national attempt to recover data that's been destroyed. And so there's this effort to gather up as many old books and newspapers and magazines that, they scour the whole country looking for this stuff. And there's this process where they're trying to redigitize all this knowledge so it becomes available again. So, and that to me, that to me was a very important part of the story, is to put that in there as far as illustrating one of the potential effects of a second civil war, particularly the one that plays out is the backstory.
All right. Now, is there much technology in your world 140 years in the future with that loss of data?
Yeah, great question. So another great question. So in the book, I write that at the very beginning, I write that the country has technologically recovered to a point of where it was at the outbreak of the war. So we have vertical takeoff and landing commercial aircraft. We have artificial intelligence robots that can hover across the ground, and they're domestic robots, I should say. We have self-driving cars as well. We have that now, but at that time, that's all you have.
Right.
And they can glide along as well. They can levitate off the ground as they travel along. And then there's obviously new computer systems and stuff like that. There's robotic soldiers that can perform tasks in dangerous areas where humans could not go to. And there's this one particular scene in Chicago. Chicago is still radiated because one of the things that happens in the war is that 4 American cities are nuked by ourselves. New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and Charlotte. And so there's a scene in Chicago where these robotic soldiers are doing some exploration, and they're involved in a science project to try and figure out how to deradiate these areas.
So your story goes more through a whole bunch of different topics, not just the recovering of baseball, but the events happening around. So it's not just focused on these 2 children.
Yeah. So the major theme is revolved around baseball. There's this undercurrent, and with these 4 large cities and their metro areas that have been uninhabitable for 100 years, and I wanted to put I call it the sci-fi chapter, where there's this project to try and figure out how do we make these areas livable again. Without revealing too much, a discovery's made that could possibly do that. And so I think that was chapter 6, but I call it the sci-fi channel.
Okay.
The sci-fi chapter. So
understand.
You have these robots and this other stuff going on.
So with that, it sounds like you thinking about that chapter, you actually enjoyed it. What was some of your favorite parts of the book that you can tell us about without giving too much away, that you think other people's going to really thrive if they knew about?
Yeah, so a couple of chapters. One chapter which takes place primarily in Dyersville, Iowa, which for baseball lovers, we all know what Dyersville is. That's the home of the Field of Dreams, and the MLB just played a couple of games there over the last 2 years. But I wanted to put that in there as a kind of a tip of the hat to the whole thing of what Dyersville means to the baseball fans, and plus just fans in general of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a scene in there that takes place at the grandfather's house. He's got a farmhouse out in the cornfields. Another tip to the story, but there's no Field of Dreams in the story, or no no baseball field in Dyersville. It's just a location of kind of a tip of the hat to all of that. But a really endearing scene on the front porch of this grandfather's farmhouse plays out
All right.
without telling too much. And another good scene involves the president of the United States and giving a speech. I really spent some time on that and tried to have the speech kind of sound like something like a Gettysburg Address Part Two.
All right.
That was pretty cool.
Sounds good. So is it there are more characters? I understand it's focused around the main boy that's 12 years old and his brother.
Uh-huh.
But is there more people involved in this, or is it just those two
Oh
who are
yeah,
going
yeah. There's
through?
supporting characters. Joe Scott's father, a co-worker of his father, a grandfather that plays a pretty big role, and then we've got the president that gets involved, and then there's a surprise appearance towards the end of the book by some famous people that I
All
won't
right.
say who they are.
Sounds
But
like a plan. So with this, obviously in the
well, and then there's
story,
a very important character, is a newspaper reporter. He's a very important character that gets involved in helping cover the story of what these boys are trying to do.
all right. So now these boys, do they have issues between, like I know brothers, like my brother and I don't see us actually ever making that kind of trip together, especially when we're young, because my brother and I like to fight as much as we could, just being young and dumb and all this. But I know some brothers were very close. Do they have the brother conflict between themselves, or that brother give and take or push or antagonizing
Yeah,
each other?
no, yeah, no. Good question, but no. And you know, one thing that comes out when you read the book is that when that undercurrent we've been talking about pops up,
Mm-hmm.
it's very sobering to read about. But the overall general storyline is meant to be a feel good story of hope. And so, in that regard, the idea of interpersonal conflict is really not there. And it's not there intentionally because of what happened in the war when you had all these interpersonal conflicts that just, exploded in such a horrible way. And so I was very intentional that I wanted this to be a very hopeful book, an inspiring book, a thoughtful book. So it was very important in the storyline that, unlike now when we're not getting along, in the
Mm-hmm.
story, people are getting along again. And that is very, very clear in the storyline that people are getting along.
All right. So the family dynamics, even simple brotherly rivalry or things like that, has changed compared to now and before time. So that's an interesting fact to see. There is a difference in family interactions. Now, with everything going on in your book, how much of it is there is there any way that these kids cannot bring it back? That I know the book makes it the death and resurrection, which tells you that they either bring baseball back or they're close to it. Is there a chance that it might not happen in the book, or is there any fear of it?
Well, the big thing is that you're starting from zero knowledge and then trying to acquire that knowledge and then trying to execute that knowledge, right? So let's
Mm-hmm.
do an analogy. Let's say we lost all the schematics for making uh, a simple electronic device.
Right.
So you start from zero, and somehow you come across, a document that tells you, well, this is this is how this was built, but then it's like, okay, this is how it's built, but then how do you bridge that how it was built from zero knowledge, because you got that middle part where you actually have to do it. You actually have to learn how to do it, right? And so that's the struggle the kids have is trying to relearn the sport and actually doing it before you can actually get to a point where you can say they actually are doing it and they've actually done it. So there's and you'll see that in the story. So.
All right. So the story also is a hunt for knowledge, not just. So there's multiple layers to this in the sense of what a reader is going to gain out of your book. So with that, is there really a driving factor that made you want to write this book?
Yeah. So I really wanted to do two things. Number one, entertain the reader.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to fulfill really a lifelong dream of writing a book. And I thought, well, I love baseball. A baseball story would be good. And then, like I say, these other things came into play, and that's how the storyline developed. But, I really wanted to entertain the reader and make them feel good when they're done reading the book. But part of that also it ties again back to making the readers think about where America is currently at and where we could be headed, and how do we make sure that what's depicted in the book doesn't actually happen, because I think there's still time that we can turn things around in this country on many different levels, and one of them would be to relearn the art of agreeing to disagree and agreeing to get along with one another, even when we don't agree. So that's
All right.
That's sorely missing.
Understand, and I agree with that. So, what is it about baseball that you love that drove you to the sport? Or because to write a book that's focused around baseball, there has to be something there that you love about it.
Yeah, so I first fell in love with baseball as a kid playing sandlot ball in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
I just dated myself, so I'm 64. 64, but grew up in the 60s and all those famous names in baseball back then, collected baseball cards. But
Mm-hmm.
it was that playing of baseball on the sandlots and playing it every day or out in front of our house, and that repetition and learning the nuances of the game, appreciating the nuances, and really was a catalyst for really falling in love with the sport. And then as I grew older, of course, attending games and still playing it as well. But I just really enjoy the nuance. I enjoy the fact that it's the only sport without a time limit. You gotta play 9 innings, and if it's an hour and a half or 3.5 or 4 hours, you gotta
Mm-hmm.
you gotta get those 9 innings and figure out the winner of the game. There's no ties or nothing,
Right.
and so that's a pretty cool feature. Obviously, I know they're trying to speed the games along because they started getting a little ridiculously long, but
Right.
I think they've accomplished that. These new rules they implemented this year appear to be working, at least from what I hear.
All right. And like I said, baseball was definitely never one of my strong suits in sports. And I just never, I mean, I always joked I'd rather watch golf on TV than watch a game of baseball in person. But I always grew up with
But
hockey and football.
you know what I call golf? I have a saying.
What's that?
Golf, the sport of golf.
Yeah.
I call golf the most cuss-inducing sport ever induced by man.
The one great thing about golf,
When
it's one of the few sports you can drink and play at the same time.
yeah, I'm
I,
not a very good golfer, so it's always a challenge to get out on the golf course.
well, that's why you have a couple beers and you blame it on the beers. I mean, I promise you, I'm a good golfer. It's just those 3 beers I drank in the first half.
uh,
No, trust
Right,
me,
right.
my golfing, it's been a few years since I've golfed, but that's what I always did. Every bad game I had is, it's not me, it's the beers.
Yeah.
So, but with that, I don't want to take up your whole time and all your day. And I really want people to reach out to you to find out more about your book and try to get it because it does sound very interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of layers, a lot of information, and a uncommon adventure that'll drag people along to, from what I understand of the reviews as well, bring that hope back and
Hmm.
bring joy of the story. So
Sure.
where can people reach out to you other than my website where I have your profile, authorblurb.com? Where's the best place if somebody wants to talk to you, find your books or what so have
Yeah,
you?
they reach me directly through my author website, and that's authorwilliamrdouglas.com. Pretty simple. You can email me through that site. There's also links to the various places where you can purchase the book. You know, obviously the big hitters: Amazon, Google, Apple, yada yada yada, Barnes and Noble. And then there's also an author profile page on an Amazon, but there's
Hmm.
also links on my authorwilliamrdouglas.com site to all the numerous podcasts that I've been on talking about the book. So would love to hear from your readers, and would love to hear your review as well when you get a chance. That would be great to hear your
Uh,
thoughts, especially as a non-baseball fan.
well, I'll add it to my list. But I will add you to my list of reviews. So once I get to that point, I'll be happy to do one. Now, I do appreciate you being here. Like I said, I'm not going to take up all your day. If you can hold on for me just for a moment, I'm going to end the recording for everybody else, but I'd like to talk to you just for a few more minutes.
Sure, it's been fun being on the show. Thank you for the opportunity.
I enjoyed you being here too. Hold on. So thank you for making it this far. Remember, you can go to authorblurb.com where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.